For those who don't know me, my name is Dan Butchko, and I am the General Manager of Playcrafting. We are all about growing and empowering the game development community here in New York and in Boston. We do that through education, classes and workshops up to this point. Now, obviously, we're starting our first foray into longer-term courses. Greg Trefry is here today to talk about that course. Other than that, we also have a ton of different events going on throughout the year, but that's all coming up in 2015 because this is our last one of the year. And just stay tuned for any announcements around that. But in the meantime, I'll hand it over to Greg. He'll talk about himself, he'll talk about the course, and I'll come back at the end. Cool.
So thank you guys all for coming. Thanks for hanging out while we wait to get started. So what we'll do, as Dan was saying, is I'll talk a little bit about my experience at the company I run, sort of the stuff we've done, because it very much maps to sort of my approach to game design. And then I'll talk a little bit about like sort of general approach to game design that I have, and then hopefully we'll get up and move around a little bit. So I run a company called Gigantic Mechanic with my partner Mattia Romeo. It's a game design company. We do a lot of things that sort of marry the play, like gameplay, online, virtual play, and the real world in some way. I seem so close to saying marry the virtual and real. I'm so ashamed of myself. So we're really interested in like sort of real games that have real world components to them, like either through installations or live events. We pride ourselves on really focusing on the player. So the sort of stuff we do kind of winds up being a little odd, and it's very kind of game design-y in a way. We do make video games, but we really like to get our hands dirty with like physical things, social things, stuff like that. So a little bit about my experience. I worked at a company called Game Lab for a number of years. It was a casual game company in New York. They did things like Diner Dash, JoJo's Fashion Show, very casual games. We worked on things like, this is Diner Dash. Has anybody ever played Diner Dash? Okay. If you haven't, you should go play it. It's sort of like a classic casual game. I was also the lead designer for a little while on GameStar Mechanic, which is a web-based tool that teaches kids about game design and systems thinking using a game design WYSIWYG tool. So that's sort of the stuff we did there, and that sort of focus on like early in my career on doing a lot of casual stuff has sort of stuck with me. We always think with this carried through, like a lot of the stuff we do is not very hardcore. It's very much about like what's the player got to do, how do we get them involved really fast. It's like we're not going to ask for 70 hours. We're going to ask for like 15, 30 seconds of their time. We'll show them that it's going to be really fun in those 15 or 30 seconds, and then hopefully get another minute and a half out of them, and then hopefully another 4 or 5 minutes out of them after that. So that's sort of general casual ethos of like really easy, quick to play is sort of like permeated a lot of the stuff we do. I also started a festival called the Come Out and Play Festival with some friends. This is a big festival of street games that happens every year. This is Pac-Manhattan that was done by Mattia. The festival is it's all like big blown up street games people play around New York, so that includes everything from putt-putt through Thompson Square Park to big games of zombie tag across like the Lower East Side. And again, like these, they tend to be, they tend to sort of have, some of them have like technological components to them. I guess the technology there is a golf ball and a golf stick or a golf club. And what's really interesting, I think, about these sorts of things is the way the games are kind of interesting, but also the way they interact with the public space around them. Like that woman watching these get like two hipsters play putt-putt. And the way you can use games in that way to sort of shift people's thinking about a space. So if you like Pac-Manhattan, for example, is played around the area around Washington Square Park, and once you see like the board for Pac-Manhattan, you're like, oh, it does look kind of like a Pac-Man grid around Washington Square Park. And then you kind of never think about that area again the same way again. It's always kind of back in your head. And so that's one of the things that we're always trying to do at Gigantic Mechanic now is like, how do we use games, and especially when they're interacting with the real world, to like shift people's like perspective on something a little bit. I taught a bunch of classes. I teach at NYU. I teach a class there called Big Games. I'm teaching another class there called Kids Play this semester. And I've also written, about game design in articles and even once in a book. which is really great. It's an amazing movie. But it was fun. It was one of those things where it was fun. It was fun. Has anybody here written up a book? It's like a weird labor. At the end, I was like, I will never do that again. And now I'm like thinking about doing it again. And it was. I don't have that feeling with games. Every time I make a game, I'm like, I should make another one of those. So let's just stick to games. So a little bit about the games we make at Gigantic Mechanics. So this is a game we made a couple years ago called Alphabet City. It's basically like Boggle meets Foursquare. So it takes the names of all the locations around you and then uses them in a sort of Boggle-like word game. And again, it was supposed to be really casual. We made another location-based game called Gigapud, where you played like putt-putt around your neighborhood. And we totally broke all of our own rules because we were like, oh, people would love to play golf around their neighborhood. It would take about 30 minutes. You know what no one has time for like 30 minutes to do? Play golf around their neighborhood, including us. We actually had to build a mode into it where you could just play it on your couch. We called it the couch mode because we didn't want to walk around and do it. And that should have been the first sign that we were like really way off base. So when we went back and made this game, we really thought like, oh, let's get back to that like casual ethos of like short, quick bursts of play. So you turn this on, you get the name of a restaurant or business or neighborhood around you, and then you play this really quick little word game on it. So again, it's supposed to be really kind of easy to play, but the game actually gets kind of hardcore the more you play it. We've done some installation work. This was a game called Shadow Play we did a couple of years ago. We showed it in a bunch of different festivals around the world. And this one, you stand in the way of your shadow and use your shadow to grab those balls on the screen. There's like a camera watching it. So it's kind of, what we found with this one was really interesting because it was around the time when like the Kinect was getting big and you guys have all used the Kinect, right? It's all like, and so it's cool, but it's also really kind of weirdly disconcerting. But what we found was the best thing about this thing was that your shadow is like such a beautiful thing that you recognize, and it's like so intimate and it's so fluid. So just like getting to use that was like this sort of an amazing sort of controller. And again, this game was like designed for a very specific thing. It's not a terribly deep game. It was designed to be played for 2 or 3 minutes at a time. So it's about fun for that amount of time. And so that's another thing to take into account is like sometimes there's this like people have this like idea that they're like, oh, we need to make a game that's going to be so deep and will be playable forever. You don't need to do that. If someone's only going to play it for 5 minutes, you don't have to make it like fun for 5 minutes. So these are all sort of things that to think about as you're starting to design games. We did the game for the Museum of. So this was so these things like Alphabet City and Shadow Play use a fair amount of some technology uses computer vision. The other one, Alphabet City, uses iPhones and GPS and stuff like that. This was a game we did for the MoMA last year called Everyone's a Critic. And what they wanted was a game that people could play in the galleries. It had to be pick up and play. They didn't want they experimented with some other games in the galleries, and there's been lots of scavenger hunts around museums. Like, we don't want something like that. We don't want to facilitate it. We want something that anyone can do. So like, all right, that's a kind of a weirdly tall order to just pick up a thing and play in a museum. So we sat down and we came up with this paper game. It's you pick up the handout because they have like you guys have all been to a lot of people have been to the MoMA at some point. There's all those things you're like, oh, free. And you get those things and you walk around with them and you're like, ugh. So we were trying to do a little bit better than that. So the way this game works is it's basically like Apple. It's kind of like apples to apples. So anyone? Okay, yeah. So like in apples to apples, like there's a word and then you all hand something in. The way this one game works is one person is the critic. They pick one of these themes. They say, find me a painting in here which is about darkness, and then all the other people are artists, and they all wander around and they like look at the paintings, and they all come back together, and the critic says, okay, artists, like tell me what you found, and then the artists all take them around, and be like, well, look at this painting here, the guy cut off his ear, that's clearly very dark, but look, if you also see here, this other person here behind them, they gouge their eyes out, they're blood, that's about darkness. Then other people share theirs, and then eventually the critic says, all right, that was the best, I picked this one, that's the winner, and then that person's the critic for the next round. So it's a really simple social game. Again, so when we were designing this game, we thought a lot about like the context, like what is what is someone going to do in a museum? What sort of behaviors can you ask of people? And that's another super important thing to think about as you're designing games is if you're asking people to do certain behaviors on like a console, like there's a certain realm of things people will do, but if you're asking them to do it in a museum, like can't ask them to run around really, you can't ask them to move stuff because they would get arrested very quickly. But you can ask them to talk about the art, you can ask them to walk around and look at it, and that's really what we were working with the education department, what they really wanted. So when we were making this game, like, people would make up the most ludicrous stuff about it. We play tested a bunch, and people would make up the most ludicrous things about all the paintings, and we were like really nervous that we're like, the education department's gonna be like, people are just making shit up. And they were like, no, it's great, they talked about the art, who cares what they said? They like looked at it for like, you know, a minute, and usually the average length of time to look at a painting in like a museum is around like 10 or 12 seconds at most. It's like, oh yeah, I got it. So this just got them to look at it and think about it and do some active interpretation. And that's sort of, you know, that's what it was sort of designed to do, is just get them to talk, look at the stuff and talk about it for a little bit. And point at your friends. We did, so that was an example of a game that we did, which was super lo-fi, right? And this is, again, back to this idea of like context and like what you're trying to get out of it. That's always an important thing to think about with game design. Like oftentimes is, you know, people come to Gigantic Mechanic and go like, well, what platforms do you guys work on? What technology do you guys use to make games? And we're like, well, kind of, we try to be agnostic about that. Like some people were like, well, we're a Unity shop and all we do is make stuff in Unity, or we make stuff for the PS3. But our feeling on it is that like, there's the right platform is like, in technology should be driven by the experience you want to deliver. So we spend a lot of time like talking about what is the experience you want people to have? Like how do you want them to feel as they play it? And then we can figure out what the right thing is. If it's GPS, or it's shadows, or it's a piece of paper, and then sort of use that as the way into it. And let the game design like drive the game, not like a piece of technology they're using. So you don't always wind up being like, well, let's just make another platformer because we already have the code base for that. I mean, there's something to be said for that because we do the way we do it, we wind up like doing a lot of stuff from scratch every time, which has its costs. So this was a game we did with Sesame this year, called Sesame Street Foxheads. It was basically the idea. We were working with the people at the Innovation Lab there, and they wanted to make a game about executive function, which is the idea that like when little kids have to, you know, there's sort of mapping to what they're doing, and they have to sort of wait. You know, it's not all like, give me this thing now, or like things don't respond to them immediately. So we want to do something about like commands, and then sort of mapping their commands onto the world. So we decided to make we kind of experimented with a bunch of different things, everything from Simon Says to this game, which was basically wound up being like remote control parents. So we gave all the kids Nexus 7 tablets with that little controller on it, and then the parents had to wear Bluetooth headphones and were blindfolded, and then the kids drove them around and made them play this little game. So Cookie Monster and Elmo are both trying to catch the dude with the cookie on his head. And the kids are sort of driving around. So it winds up being this really weird, herky-jerky, blindfolded tag. But it brings a ton of joy to the kids who are playing it, because like it's like, you know, flip the sort of normal position they're in. Like now the parents are putting all this trust in them. They're wearing this stupid box on their head, and they're getting to tell them what to do. And so the way we designed this one was as for an event, as a game of tag, but we've also seen it used as sort of just a simple toy, like, you know, a parent and a kid being like, all right, well, you use the joystick, I won't be blindfolded, but you just tell me where to go and I'll do it. And like my son likes doing that, he'll just run me into the wall over and over again. That's the best thing in the world. He's like, again. And so there's this nice sense of intergenerational play. And so this was, again, a case where with the technology, we were making the thing like, oh, we'll use these tablets, and this is really slick, and we were working with Sesame, and we're like, oh, maybe they'll make us some sweet like Sesame Street masks we can use. And by the very beginning, we're like, well, let's just put a box on our head for now, and then we'll figure that out. And the box wound up being just fine. It wound up being weird and goofy and cool to have this weird Minecrafty looking, you know, Sesame Street box on your head. So it wound up just staying that way. So again, like a sort of this weird marriage of lo-fi and high tech. This is a game we did this year for Come Out and Play called Scattershot. And we do every year, as I said, we run Come Out and Play, which is this big festival of outdoor games. And it's kind of a chance for us to show off a bunch of stuff. It's also a chance for us to experiment with different ideas. So this year we wanted to make has anybody ever been to Come Out and Play? Oh, cool, awesome. So as I said, it's this big street games festival, and we get like around like 2,000 people over the course of the weekend. And this is an event we do called After Dark. It happened. This was down in Dumbo this last July, and there was probably like 1,200 people at it. It was like super packed, and there's lots of different. There's like 15 or 20 different games going on. People running around doing all this stuff. And so at Gigantic, because we run the festival, we always kind of take it on ourselves to like design something for a specific problem. And so one of the problems we've seen over the years is there's a lot of lines and people hate standing in line. So we're like, let's make a game that everyone can play while they're standing in line. So we'll just be a big projected game that they could look at. And so the design challenge for this one is going to be, it's got to be porous. Like people can come in and out. It can't start and end. It's got to, it starts when a player enters, and if that player they die, it keeps going and they can re-enter. It's got to accept whoever wants to play it, like however many people are there, and give them something kind of interesting to do. So we designed this gigantic arena shooter, that like a 100-person arena shooter game that you played with your cell phone. So everyone had a little, you would log on to it and play the game, and your little ship would appear on the screen, and you would fly around. Let's see, what time is it? Actually, you guys want to play that game?
Yeah. Yes.
Cool. Let's hope the internet here works for all of you. So this game, it's still a little rough. It was, as I said, it was designed as a sort of experiment. But if you have a phone, you should be able to just go to that URL on the bottom. Now what you'll do when you do it, you'll join, we want to make it somewhat collaborative, so you'll pick a spot to join. And then other people you're going to be on a ship with somebody else. Are people able to get on the internet? Does it work?
Yeah, it's MSFT Open is the internet you guys can use.
Username and password.
There's no password. It's open.
All right. So then if you press the fire button, it should. So the idea for this game was it was supposed to be just a super, I'm gonna shoot good at ships. Let's spin around in a circle. Also, I mean, so it was designed to be super casual, so people could join in. And it worked very well in a crowd, because as you see, it's like, it's kind of fun for a couple minutes, and then it's not a super long experience. I think there's some things we did well with it, some things that could be fixed on it, like the interface could use a little love. Also, our sort of general feeling that it would be fun to collaborate with others may actually just be frustrating more than fun. We imagine that you'd feel like standing next to somebody and be like, yeah, or you'd find another person on your ship. So for example, who else is on this ship? All right, so that's you and I. So we have to, if we had our wits about us, we would figure out how to, you can kind of navigate around by taking turns firing. But again, that was one of the hard things about designing a game like this is it's hard to get 100 people together to all play. And so this was we learned a lot by actually doing it at the festival. So I think after doing it, we learned a lot about like sort of how people behaved in like a sort of course event like this, which, as I said, we use these as experiments that we then take into other projects we do. So that's just an example of like a really small, like little video game. But the basic framework for it is one that works for other things. So one of the things I'm doing now is like a sort of missile control style game for that, where you have like a bunch of turrets along the bottom, and now you control it all by yourself. You don't have to worry about your friend doing it, and you're just trying to stay alive as long as you can, save the earth for as long as you can. But again, like we're really interested in these sort of massively multiplayer passive game, chorus games. We did a game for, we also make really big, silly physical spectacles like this. This is a game I made a couple years ago called Charge of the Rubber Ball Brigade. I was doing a lot of reading about the Civil War. I was like that guy who would talk about the Civil War all the time. We'd be like, well, back in 1862, it was much worse. And so I was reading this book called Killer Angels by Michael Shara about the Battle of Gettysburg, and the final part of the Battle of Gettysburg is like Pickett's charge, where they all run up this hill and the Confederates are all slaughtered. It's a sort of turning, you could say maybe one of the turning points of the Civil War. And I was like, man, that was really crazy. They all knew that was a really bad idea. I wonder why they did that. And so I was like, I wonder if I could make a game that sort of explored that idea in some way. So this game uses really simple mechanics borrowed from dodgeball and capture the flag. That's not working. So. Go away. Oh, I know one. I'm still playing. All right. All right. So the idea was to use really simple mechanics borrowed from like capture the flag and dodgeball. So I was like, oh, it'd be, but for like the Civil War, it's got to be like a really big dodgeball game. It's got to be like 150 people playing. It's got to be like 200 balls, and it's got to be big yoga balls and little balls. So it's just like a total chaotic shit show. And also like as you guys ever played, and this is like and thinking about like and I know this all sounds super silly, but it's like thinking about the mechanics of it. So how many when you play dodgeball, where do you stand when you play dodgeball?
Front lines.
What's that?
Front lines.
The front lines, okay, that's where somebody else say.
Far away.
Yeah, the back. That's like you're dead. You're like yeah, most people just stand in the back. They're like, I'm not like gonna get hit with the ball. And so I was like, oh well, but that's not what Pickett's charge was about. Pickett's charge was about them like running into this fusillade of stuff and then all being slaughtered. So it's like, so I gotta get them all to like not stand in the back. I need them all to like run forward. Because if they all stand back there, it's just gonna be like it's gonna go on forever. There's gonna be like 150 people all chucking balls from long range. So I was like, okay, how could I get them to run to mechanically go to the other side? So I was like, well, why don't this instead of being like dodgeball where you're trying to get all the other players out, it's about capturing flags. And so the blue team is on this side, and they have to get the gray flags, which are all on the other side. And the gray team has to get all the blue flags on their side. To get the flags, you have to run into the other team's territory, where they will then mow you down. And you have to get their flag and bring it back to your side. And so there's 3 flags, 3 blue flags and 3 gray flags, all playing in your territory, and you're trying to get the other teams. And so what you get is this situation where people initially are like, we're going to stay in the back, and then eventually they piece it together that they're like going to have to go get them. And they're probably not going to make it back, right? And so they would like all get together in big groups, be like, all right guys, like charge, and they would all run, and someone would grab it, and they would get hit, and they would drop the flag, and then someone else would pick it up and advance it like 2 feet. And so it started to get at that feeling, and in this game also, I wanted it to be like, again, like a Civil War battlefield, like just kind of littered with the dead. So instead of like just going off to the side when you're out, you just laid on the ground. And you could call for help, you could call for a medic, and the medic could come and revive you. So there was like, by the end of every round, which lasted about 2 or 3 minutes, there's like just nothing but like, 75, 80 bodies all lying around crawling for the medic. And despite all this, you would think that no one would ever get the flags, but they always do. Like somebody always manages to do it because it's just so chaotic. Like my friend Matt Parker was playing it. He was like, it's like the game, like what blew me away about that, like about the game was I was standing there. I was like, I decided I was just going to guard our flag. So I was just standing there guarding the flag. It was like right here in front of me. And I looked up and I looked down and it was gone. He was like, to this day, I have no idea where it went, but it was just that sort of like weird, chaotic mess of a battle that I couldn't quite figure it out. And so it was like through a combination of really simple, like little mechanics that you are really familiar from, like capture the flag and dodgeball and these other things that you can begin to build something, piece something together, which gets at a certain feeling or vibe that you want. And so that's sort of like I think the trick of game design is like getting familiar enough with those things that you can begin to, once you start saying like, well, what's the context I have? Where am I going to do this? What am I looking people to do? What's the experience I want people to have? Then how do I like piece that together out of little bits and pieces? And then we use that, some of the learnings, again, like and this goes back and forth again from like the weird physical play games like that to video games. So what that game was very much about, like Charge of the Revolver game was very much about like how do we create like a feeling of empathy? How do I give you empathy for like the feeling of like, I'm going to run into battle, not make it back, but that's okay because my team will win, and that's good. To just create that one little bit, because also like games are really, sometimes people are like, oh, let's use games to make people learn a lot of stuff, and games are really kind of bad tools for that. They're very blunt instruments. People get like one thing out of them usually. But like one of the things they can really get I think is empathy, is like because it puts you in someone else's shoes or makes you understand, have a very visceral understanding of something. So we use that idea. We made a game with a documentary filmmaker called Margot Williams. He'd made this documentary about called The Undocumented, about undocumented migrants crossing the Sonoran Desert. And he came to us and he was like, I want to make a game that goes along with the movie about undocumented migrants crossing the Sonoran Desert into the U.S. And we're like, that sounds really weird. And most people think like it may be possibly offensive, but there's still something really interesting to kind of explore there. So we thought about that, like how could we create, like we didn't want it to be like, oh, and like a really super informational game. What we wanted to do is get it like a little bit of that feeling that you get when you play Oregon Trail, right? Like when you guys play Oregon Trail at some point in your lives. Again, if you shouldn't, like along with Niner Nash, you should go play Oregon Trail. But like that feeling of like you go buy all your salted beef and whatnot, and then you get in your wagon, you're going across the plains, and it like also gets a snake bite, and then the wagon wheel breaks and you're dead. And you're like, oh man. So we wanted to have this game have that feeling of like not to be about like about like the politics of the situation or about like the exactly how it happens or anything, but just to get at the feeling of them walking across a desert and slowly dehydrating to death. Because that's what happens. Like that's what Marco was very interested in, was like this as you cross in that area of the Sonoran Desert, there's like literally like the remains both of like the stuff that people carried and also people that were doing that. So in this game we borrowed very heavily from the mechanics of Oregon Trail, and you carry water and some food, and then you trek across the desert, and berries slowly dehydrate, and you just get slower and slower and slower. And so we just want to generate that feeling of like, oh my gosh, this is like weighing me down. Like I can't, like it just gets slower and harder to do. Again, because we realized like this is going to be used in a certain context. It may be in education, in classrooms, or it may be played online where we have like 5 minutes to tell somebody something. Anything, we have to hit them hard and hit them like soon with like the one main idea that we're trying to get across. And so I think the game kind of does that. It sort of generates a certain amount of empathy for the player, or for the migrants. But again, that was like kind of using some of the lessons that we learned from things like the rubber ball game, where it's like, how do we use mechanics to get at something, to get at like a feeling or an idea. So And the reason I show you a lot of that is because it very much is like, that kind of gives you a sense of like where I'm coming from in terms of like my approach to design and games. Now, like, there's like there's so many different ways to design games, and there's no one right one. You guys are all in New York, which has like the Game Center and Parsons and SVA, and all those have a sort of different tenor. Like NYU's, like the Game Center is like, that's like the heady, sort of formal school of game design. Parsons is a little looser, I think. So I'll kind of tell you, I think I kind of somehow probably come down more on the looser end of things in many ways. So Bernard Suits, he wrote this book called Grasshopper, Games, Life, and something or other. It's a very good book. But he kind of summarized them really well. He said, like, games are like this voluntary effort to overcome unnecessary obstacles, right? It's like, that guy running 50 meters would have been so much easier if somebody hadn't put those fucking obstacles, those hurdles in his way. It's like, what? That was something I gotta jump over? But in doing that, it makes it more interesting than just the 50-meter dash, right? It's like suddenly there's like this thing you have to do. And so games are all about doing that. They're about like, there's like a clear, easy way to do something, and then games are about making that just kind of a little bit harder. Like, it's maybe more obnoxious, but not too obnoxious so you don't want to do it. So like, for example, if those hurdles were much higher, you'd be like, I'm not doing that. If they were much lower, it'd be kind of trivial, but with just the right height, it adds the right amount of challenge to it. And so games are sort of a process of bracketing around that. So when you're designing games, the way I like to think of it is you kind of take this like moment of play. So this girl's like kicking around this ball in the yard, and she is playing something which looks like what? Right, soccer. She clearly doesn't know all the rules to soccer. She may not even know she's playing soccer, but she's like kicking the ball. She's like, oh, this is kind of fun. And then her dad's probably like, okay. And then she's like, oh, it's kind of fun to kick it past my dad, or whatever. And so, you know, all those like those moments of play eventually get structured into a game, right? And so like the official rules for soccer, the FIFA guidelines for soccer are like 115 pages that define everything from how tall your socks have to be to the offside rules and everything like that. All of which is important in high-level play, but you know, not so important here, where really the main thing about soccer is like, it's just fun to kick the ball around, and it's really fun to kick it past people who don't want it to go somewhere, right? And it's like, its kernel, that's kind of what it's about. And so as a game designer, you're constantly looking for things like that, like what? And especially at Gigantic Mechanic, that's what we do a lot of for, is like look at what's some interesting moment of play, and then how do we make that into a game? Like how do we take the playful little bit of it to add just enough goals and structure that it starts to get at something that we're interested in. And the way we approach that is we really think a lot about designing for aesthetics. Like, and this is in the classes thing I want to stress a lot is it's making games is both hard and easy in a way, right? It's hard to make good games all the time. It's not that hard to make a good game once, right? Like everybody's right occasionally. Like, oh, peanut butter and chocolate go well together. Who knew? And like I see so many like students in game designers, frankly, the professional ones that I know too. Like you know, you kind of stumble upon something you're like that was cool. Because you're like, oh, it turns out matching 3 gyms is really fun. And so, but it's like, can you like get to that point every time, right? That's not to like, you know, say that the people who invented Bejeweled, you know, they're geniuses. But it's like about like being intentional about this sort of stuff you're designing and really thinking about it. So there's a famous paper by Mark LeBlanc and Robin Hoodicke called MDA, or Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics, which is it's a short 2 or 3 page paper. And that sort of, in the class, will be a bit of the foundation for the way we think about and approach game design. And what I like to do is add like one thing to that idea of mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics, and that's the idea of like activities. That before you get mechanics, you have activities, like things that you just sort of do. Again, like that's I'm just running around, kicking a ball. It's not at the formal level yet. It's just like something you're kind of doing, and then you begin to structure with mechanics. And then out of that, you get some other stuff. So with real quickly, I want to run through this idea that Mark and Robin lay out. So, you this kid's carrying a ball, he's carrying a soccer ball, he's running around with it. It doesn't look like he's not playing soccer right now, he's doing something else. That looks like what? What's that? Yeah, rugby, football maybe. It's clearly, not yet. But you can see, like, if we began to structure that, we said, like, okay, we'll take this and we'll start to, like, put, like, really formal mechanics around that. So, the mechanics would be, like, the official rules for how this operates. So, in football, we've got 100, you got to go 100 yards, you have to go, or, in official football, and, street football, maybe a little less. And you have to advance a certain 10 yards every 4 downs to keep advancing, or you have to give back the ball to the other team. And then if you get the ball into the end zone, then you get a certain number of points. And if you kick the ball through the big upright yellow things, you get another set of points. So those are all the official mechanics of how the game works. And then there's also a bunch of guys who are trying to stop you from doing that. They get to line up and tackle you, or touch you, or grab flags off of you. And those all are like sort of the formal mechanics of this thing. So they take what this kid is doing and begin to sort of organize it and codify it in some way. So we'd say, like, here's like, okay, kid, you have to run with the football, and big guys are going to chase you, and if they catch you, they can tackle you. But if you get into the end zone, then you'll get 7 points or 6 points. And so that sort of set of mechanics lead to a set of dynamics about how the system operates, right? And so in football, like, there's nothing in the rules of football which say, like, okay, your quarterback should stand here and then hand it off to the running back who should run around here, and your wide receiver should come and cut across the middle there in a short route while this guy runs a long route down the side. Those are things that emerge from the play. Those are what people figure out that you should do from it, right? That's not baked into the rules of football. Those are how people begin to interpret it, and the things that the dynamics of what people do with it. So you can imagine with football, it's the people will be like, whoa, we're going to line up here, and the other guy's going to line up right next to us, because if they lined up over there, then I would just run by them. So they eventually figure out how that works, and they run into each other.
But would you call those strategies?
Partially, yeah. I mean, they're like, the two things kind of go hand in hand. The dynamics of it, sometimes they're the strategies, and sometimes they're just like the things that it sort of allows for, right? A certain type of play. Does that make sense?
So you're saying it's activities that the rules you're allowed to do within the
Right. Yeah. Exactly. They're kind of these are the things you will naturally do while playing football. Like like if you're playing football and you have the ball and there's a big and I'm chasing you, what will you do? Yeah, exactly. You'll run very fast, right? Run as fast as you can. Like that's like that becomes you won't like trot. So you'll go fast. So the game has that. And if I tackle you, and if I'm not allowed to tackle you, and it goes into the ground, then the dynamic it has like this one of kind of force and that sort of this is the interplay between those two things. And what that leads to is a sort of set of aesthetics, right? Like this is what the game eventually begins to look like. So you could say that football, like a lot of people's interpretation of football, and quite rightly, is that it's a very like martial sport, right? That it's all about lining up and bashing into each other and conflict. It does produce that. It also produces relatively balletic moments as well. Like, you could say that there's a certain range of aesthetics that football allows for. Ones of both like violence and grace. Catching, for example, that's Keith Nicks catching a touchdown against the hated Dallas Cowboys. That's like there's something kind of beautiful about that moment. It looks not unlike the sort of aesthetics you would have like in a ballet performance. And again, there's nothing in the rules of football that say, and when you catch the ball, you should do it like this. That's just what happens, like as you play it from those dynamics of like him having to run and jump and catch it and do that thing. It produces this sort of look and feel to it. So when you play the game, you get a certain feel out of it, right? And so I don't think football was designed when they were designing football. That wasn't the end state they had in mind necessarily. Like, how do we get that? That like was a sort of an occurrence of a lot of other stuff that was built up and rules over time, rule changes over time. a lot of them like very, thought of very intentionally. Some of them rule changes that were done, like, originally football there was no passing game, right? It was all just guys running down the field, and the flying wedge, that killed a lot of people. They decided not to do that anymore. They banned that, and then they had they implemented the forward pass, and eventually Bill Walsh from the San Francisco 49ers comes along with like a strategy, what we say is a set of strategies about passing, which then produced a game that looks more like this, which is all about like the sort of West Coast throwing offense, right? So the sort of football isn't intentionally designed necessarily, but you can imagine games that are intentionally designed. So if we were going to think of from an aesthetic angle, so if we thought of a game like Rock Band, right? When they made Rock Band, I think I wasn't in the room when the guys in Harmonix made it, but I imagine this was sort of what they had in mind. They're like, how do we make people feel like young Mick Jagger and young Keith Richards, not old ones? And it's just like they're on stage just rocking out, like super cool and awesome. Like that's what we want people to feel, because they made a bunch of those guys had made some rhythm action games before that, like Frequency and I can't remember the other one, Amplitude, I think, which were like these weird sliding spaceship rhythm action games, which didn't feel like playing music at all. They felt like being in a spaceship rave on a roller coaster. And so I think they were like, okay, well, we want a rhythm action game which feels like music, which feels awesome, like about being on stage, like Mick Jagger and Stones. And so, like, what kind of activities could we get that would get people to do that, right? It's like, well, clearly air guitar, people do that. Like, they have contests about doing that. They don't have to actually play guitar. I mean, we can have people play on stage. That's unlikely. That's a lot easier for most of us to do, even those of us who don't know how to play guitar. So how do we take this activity and like this other just general beat tapping activity that people do? We all like go to concerts and keep time and tap our fingers, and there's something kind of fun about that. There's something weirdly obsessive compulsive about that. And there's a little bit about game design, which is also like preying upon people's obsessive compulsive disorders. Like what are weird repetitious things people do, and can I get them to do them for a game? And so they, took what they had made already with this sort of beat matching game and just clicking on things at the right time, tapping your fingers, and began to structure that into this, into Rock Band. But if they just made this and you're playing it on a controller, right? Like would that have felt like Mick Jagger? No, why not? Right, exactly. No one, like Mick Jagger has never done this. Like I'm sure that guy, I bet even when he plays video games, it's more awesome than that. So that wouldn't feel like that. So like what they need to do is they need to, and this is a mechanical decision, they need to make you stand like this. They just need to get your hands further apart. And so what they did was they mapped that to those same controls. Those are the same things you would get on an Xbox controller or a PlayStation 1, and just put the buttons further apart. So you have to stand like that, make the air guitar motion, right? And by doing that, they make that mechanical decision, and suddenly you have this dynamic like, well, I'm going to stand like this, and then we want you to occasionally go like that, because rockers do that. So like we'll have star power, so we'll put a little accelerometer, and occasionally you'll go like that and get points. So then we'll get that motion where people do that thing. And all that set of like beat matching games and guitar things leads to like, people rocking out and having fun, right? Or you can play it like this as well. And they're having fun as well. They probably feel awesome as well. It's like, because they still feel like they're playing music. And they're sort of doing that performative bit. And I think this is the other thing too. Have people in here played Rock Band at some point? Right. So you have all LARPed, whether you know it or not. You've all live action role played, which is like a weird, like, oh, I'm never live act, but like that's what Rock Band is. Like I'm in a rock band. But again, they play on that fantasy of it, right? They use like rock music to do that. And so I think that's like that was a very clear idea of like, they have an aesthetic goal in mind, and then you like working, like figuring like, okay, well, we know we want people to end here, so what activities and what mechanical choices can we make that will combine together to get that aesthetic feeling, and march towards that in your design. So the sort of general way we approach that, I mean, that's all well and good from a philosophical angle. Of course, we should do that all the time. Let's just have like really, wonderful ideas, and we'll we'll write them down on paper and then they will immediately happen. That also is not how game design works. I assume people, if you've come to this, you've done some game design at some point, right? And is that like, no? Okay. Well, I will tell you, if you haven't, if you have done it, I'm sure you'll know that players do not do what you expect. And if you have done it, like if you haven't done it, I will tell you now, you will be wrong so often. I'm wrong all the time. So when we approach game design, we approach it like this process, right? So we do this initial phase of researching and concepting. So we think about like, what's the thing we want to make this game about? And this is true whether we're doing it as a project on our own or as a project for clients. So this is a game we made for the American Museum of Natural History for an event they were doing about sharks. And this was going to be an event in the Milstein Hall, that one with the big whale. And there's going to be like several hundred or 1,000 kids, it turned out, that were going to come through this thing and see all these exhibits. And then we were supposed to design a game that they could play about sharks. And so we're like, all right, that sounds fun. We like sharks, and we like little kids. So we read a bunch about sharks, and we were like, so if you once you start reading about sharks, you're like, oh man, there's so many different types of sharks. How cool is that? Like, and they all have these different tails and fins and whatnot. And apparently, we're very easily excitable at gigantic again. So we're like, why don't we make a game that's just about all the different types of sharks? So we'll chop them up into little bits, and so it'll be about making your own shark, right? Like you'll craft your own in some way. And we were thinking like, it'll involve stickers. Stickers are awesome. Kids love stickers, so how can that not win? So we kind of knew that's what our end goal was, to get people to make a shark, make their own shark. So the question was like, how are we going to do that? So then we went into sort of prototyping and play testing, and this is where really all the important work of game design gets done, right? Like, again, going back to that idea of like, everyone's right occasionally, like, and most of us are wrong most of the time. And the process of game design is like figuring out how you're wrong and then fixing it. And that just happens by like playing the game over and over again. So like we have a policy like, I just generally make it a policy within classes or at work too, is like, if we've talked about it for more than 5 minutes, we've talked about it for way too long, right? Like you should just start doing it as soon as you can. As soon as you know what you think you can do, just do it. And see if that's any fun. So we're like, okay, we'll get them to be like, we'll get them to gather all their shark parts by doing different little mini games, like gathering food or moving and racing down in a certain way, or wearing a box on their head. This was in our box on the head phase. So this was a game about like gathering different shum and other fish. So the way we did that was in our office, we just like spread a bunch of colored blocks on the ground, and then we just spent a lot of time jumping around the office being like, oh, should it be like I take one step and I grab the blocks? Should it be that like we're all running around and racing madly to grab them, which just led to a lot of people bopping heads, which we didn't want. So like, should it be turn-based, like I go, then you go? Should we all move at the same time? Should it be one person at a time? All just to figure out like, what are sort of like the right set of activities, what's fun, what's kind of interesting for people to do. So that's Dan from the office jumping and gathering bluefish, I think. And then once you, and again, this is like the humbling part of game design, is that like, you know your initial assumptions were like, whoa, I really thought that was going to be fun. It wasn't fun at all. But like there was that one aspect of it which I think was kind of interesting. So let's see if we can follow that towards the fun. Let's keep iterating on that. And then so you modify it a little bit, and then you change it, and we'll do like another little round of testing. And you do that all the time, but like internally for a while, as long as you can, until you think you have something interesting. And then you show it to other people, like little kids or adults, whoever's going to play your game, and then they'll be disappointed with it in whole new ways that you didn't even imagine. And at which point you'll be like, oh man, they didn't do what I thought they were going to do. They broke it. They figured out there was one right way to do it, or they just got bored with it, or whatever. They came up with an exploit. And so then you have to figure out, well, how am I going to fix that exploit? Or like, if they didn't do the thing I thought was going to be fun, wasn't fun, but they liked something else, can I make it about that thing? Can I follow the fun that way in some way? So game design becomes, in that process, this play testing and iterating process prototyping and iterating process is like one of like a conversation between you and the player, right? It's like me like kind of proposing things, you, the player, testing them out, then me like listening like by like observing what they do, seeing how they react to it, and seeing like, oh, is that what I wanted? Is that the behavior I wanted? Is that the behavior they wanted? And then figuring out like, well, how would I change this? And then listening to the feedback they give you and ignoring some of the feedback they give you to get you in the right place. And then you just develop and iterate on that idea until finally you have a game where you can ask kids to run around and grab stuff, and then eventually make their own awesome super slasher sharks. And so that's like the really rewarding part. It's like once you've gotten into a shape where you feel like you've brought someone joy or something interesting, that's when it gets kind of cool. And the other parts of prototyping and playtesting is also really cool. It's hard, right? And it's like, it really is, I can't stress this enough, humbling all the time. Like you're like, oh, like you think you're so smart as a designer. Like I've been doing this for years. I know what I'm doing, and I've just given up on the idea that I'm going to be right, or I know what I'm doing. It's like the player knows, and that's who I should really be focused on, right? And that's something we try to remind ourselves of all the time. Is like, this isn't about you as a designer. It's not about like what you want. It's about like the player. And so you're constantly like thinking about them, right? And this, where like again, this goes back to that sort of philosophy of game design. And there really are genuinely different ways to think about it. A lot of people think like there are people, game designers out there who like tell you like, screw the player, who cares? It should be about like the formal system that you want to make and what the ideas you want to express. I think that is a valid position to hold. That is not the position I hold. The position I hold is like, people should be engaged. They don't have to have fun, but they need to be engaged and like excited to keep doing it. Because if they stop, then your game's over, right? Then it's like, you might as well, pack up and go home. So, we think a lot about like, how do we get them, what's the player doing? Like, how are they reacting to it? Really like a player-centered design focus, which kind of, that's like the difference between the NYU school and the USC school. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Tracy Fullerton and some of the work they've done out at USC, where they have a very player-centered approach to design, as opposed to a more formal one. Yes. So we put up lots of pictures of players around our office. It's like I don't want to see pictures of my game. I want to see pictures of people like playing my game. Like how are they reacting to it? And so again, this is one of all the stuff we'll like cover in the class is like going over like these ideas of diving a little bit deeper into that idea of like mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics and activities. And then starting to explore different areas of game design, making a bunch of stuff, but always with the idea that like you should make it, play test it, and then and iterate on it, redesign it, and then get to the final product. Again, with the idea that you were delivering this for other people to play and enjoy. So, what's with it? We still have some time, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
10 more minutes.
What's that?
Yeah, you can go for it.
All right, so let's do something, right? Like I've yapped on far too long. Also, if you do take the class, like it'll very much structure around like doing lots of stuff, like playing lots of games, because that's really the only way to do these things. Is like listening to people talk about it's horrible. Playing them is much more interesting. So we're gonna play a game. This is a game called Zombie War. It was originally, I designed it as like an exercise. So we're gonna play the sort of the uncompleted version of it, right? The idea being that you can kind of change this in some ways. And so these are people playing it and come out and play. A sort of bigger, more elaborate version of it. So the way this game works is you're all gonna stand up. You don't have to stand up yet. This is a game designed for a small confined room. It's basically zombie tag in a very turn-based zombie tag. So anybody know how zombie tag works? Okay, so this is like a childhood game. One person starts off as it. Everyone runs away from me. I tag another person. We are both it. And then you tag another person. So it starts off as one person chasing 18, and by the end it's 18 people or 17 people chasing one. And it's solitaire. For that last person's like it's the zombie, the impending zombie horde. And so the way we're going to do this is this is a game about it's going to happen in turns. It's going to happen in this room, and the idea is that we're all in this hospital ward, and so one person becomes infected and is the zombie, and we're all just trying to get out. And the more people we get out, the more humans we save. And so the way it will work is at the beginning, you will all be able to wander around. There is going to be a key hidden in here somewhere. If you find the keys, those will open the door. I'll tell you where the door is once the game starts. Then you have to get the keys to the door, and then that will open the door, and then you can leave. But if you can't get the keys to the door, if you just get to the door, you have to have the keys to open it. Because they've locked you in this ward. It's really an awful hospital. Meanwhile, if you're tagged, you become a zombie. So the way that will work is that at the beginning you all can mill about, and then I'll say freeze. Then I'll announce who the zombie is. The zombie will gonna take all the humans will gonna take 2 steps, and the zombie will gonna take 2 steps, and the humans will take 2 steps, and the zombie will take 2 steps. Clear? Okay. All right. So let's see. Everyone. All right, everyone close their eyes for a second. Everyone can get up and stand up and get ready to play. So, just put down whatever you're holding. If the humans got out all the time, it wouldn't feel like a zombie movie, right? Like, it should be that what you get is that eventually that moment where it's like all the zombies turn, and it's just like now it's just a matter of time. We're gonna slowly get you all. And so, as a sort of basic exercise, like it gets at that idea. So what I want you guys to do, because we'll take about 15 minutes to do this. I want this half of the room to take this basic idea for a game, right? And then figure out one way to modify it, right? And make it about something else, right? And so you can, and then this side of the room all work together and then modify the game in some way, some easy way. And what I want you to think about when you're doing the modification is like, can you make this game about something else? And so I'll give you 3 things to pick from. Could you make it about love? Can you make it about triumph? Or could you make it about, could you increase the sense of fear? Okay, so you can either choose fear, triumph, or love. All right, so just take 5 or 6 minutes, figure out, just take these basic rules and modify them, and then we'll try and play those 2 games real quick. Okay, introduce yourself to the rest of your team of people competing. Let's go. So what were you guys working on? What was the direction you guys went
I
with?
think the initial thought was to try and make it so that it's not an end game for the zombies.
Okay.
So that we could create more humans, and how we would bump into each other. We thought that maybe if 2 zombies bumped into each other, that would be 2 negatives equaling a human.
Right.
So just to add more in the end and maybe go back and forth a little bit between humans and zombies.
Right.
And it also added the interesting element of changing motivation. So zombies can become humans, so they become from chasers to runners, and the zombies also are trying to run away from something. And then that flips and flops for different people at different times.
So what we did was we created a mole in the zombie faction. So there was this one zombie that's trying to uninfect zombies. Exactly. Doesn't want his life. So he's trying to infect other zombies to turn them back into humans.
So what were some of the issues you guys ran into? So with it.
Having the clash where if you know that you're gonna step back, how would you bump into that other zombie to kind of create that effect?
I thought of something like, instead of us beginning, separated in the circle, maybe we can start back to back, and then we have to step at least 3, 4 steps until we have to face each other and.
Also, we had the problem with the end game the other way, where the mole was just wiping out all the zombies.
So all these bring up really interesting things, right? So the game we played, it's super simple, right? It's a child game, but there's kind of more going on with the sort of dynamics of it than maybe when it first appears. So once you start modifying things, it's interesting how every little change you make does something, right? So the change you were saying about like, oh, well, if we have a mole, like there's like a couple of interesting things with that, right? Like the first you guys were like, oh, you're a zombie and that zombie's the mole. But if you know who the mole is, then he's not a mole, right? So it's like, so it's weird, like games are often about like how much information is public and how much information is private. Like that's like a huge thing, right? So if you don't know who the mole is, then it's like a different dynamic. There's also an interesting thing you guys went into, which is like all game design eventually breaks down to a math problem, right? Like you guys were kind of getting at it there. It's like what it was initially a math problem, which only ended in one way before, where it's like it goes from everybody, 17 people chasing one. Once you add in a way to take it the other way, it quickly can go the other way and it could become overpowered the other way. So reaching that balance, that stasis, is a really interesting one. The other thing you guys have pointed out too is like there's this issue of geography, right? If it's just an open space, then that changes it very much. Then when you guys all started off like amongst a bunch of chairs, so there's like, oh, I can go this way and that way. So games are often about like they're about numbers, they're about information that people have, they're about geography and all those interesting hard problems. So it's like even something as simple as this, like you start digging into it, you're like, oh man, if I change that, then that does this and that. And that's why it all comes down to playtesting, right? It's like it's impossible to keep all that in your head, right? To imagine, to model all of that complex system and what people will do. So I like where you guys are going. I think there's something really interesting there. It's like, but it's again, that just is like a process of like now we do that, but oh, that didn't work. So like, maybe we do this. How do we get the information?
You can start without, for example, you can start like without a mole. But if a zombie gets hit twice, he becomes a mole.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So there's like lots of interesting ways you might.
So players need to stay engaged. With what's going on. They stay focused on everyone. So.
Right. So what were you guys doing? Love. Okay. Zombie love.
Well, we had a couple of different ideas. We kind of went away from the zombie idea and we're trying to, I guess, come up with sort of a pairing idea where we would have, we could figure out what the end goal was, but we would use like mechanics of like you would try to come up with rules based on something obvious about the person that might be different across the different people. Like if they're wearing glasses, you're attracted to them and you're going to try to hook up with them. Or if they're wearing warm colors, and then people would move towards the people that they were attracted to and link up, and that's sort of where we ended.
But we also play tested this one idea where it's a zombie idea using the theme of love, and when the zombie turns another person into a zombie, they link up, and so then they have to travel together, and the other people are running away. Now the problem was in this space right here, we linked up, and everyone else was just so it was 2 steps this way, 2 steps that way, and there was no. I mean, whoever had the longer legs was gonna just get away.
Can I say something? Maybe when 2 people are hooked together, instead of going 2 steps, they go 4 steps.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah,
Or on 1 step, maybe. Yeah.
So this goes back to like what we were saying earlier about the unnecessary obstacles. I mean, it's interesting the idea of like that you're linking up, right? Like that's like it's like already there's this annoying thing. It's like the zombie tag is one thing, we're all running around, but we're in this sort of tech constrained space and we're all adults. So that's why we have to do a turn-based and it's not quite as violent. And then so you're already kind of nerfing them, their movements that way. Then you're like adding this other thing, which is interesting, right? Now we have to move in a pair, and so now we're at more of a disadvantage. The games are often about that, right? Like kind of putting some weird constraint on someone's thing, like, making it just harder, just in slightly more annoying, but as long as it's not too annoying. There's something kind of interesting about like, okay, now where are we gonna go? Let's do this. And that's like what you were talking about with the pairing up, or the secret things is really interesting, right? Because it's like, it does kind of get at this idea of like, you took like that one bit of like, well, what does it mean to like, you ever say, well, what does love possibly mean? Like, if there's like, is it the breakup? Is it the finding people? Is it the being, so like, I can see a game that you could figure that out, right? Those dynamics of like, we're all milling about and like, I'm moving towards this person, but you're attracted to that person, so you're moving away, and I'm like, wait, no. And so there's like this weird sorting out. Eventually, people find some pairs. There's a couple people who never find their pair. And so, like, if you kind of kept working that angle, you would get like at a certain. You could take basically the same idea, like a turn-based grouping game in some way, and make it about something which doesn't feel like the zombie thing. It still is horrifying and terrifying and the in some ways, but it's terrifying and on a different like vector than the zombie thing. So yeah, so these are like some of the things that in the class I want to focus on doing, just these sorts of things, right? Like it's like there's a lot of video, people will often think game design, we're going to make video games, and we'll talk about a lot of video games, we'll play video games and think about them, but like a lot of game design comes down to this, like how do you like change and modify people's behaviors, give them the right constraints to deliver the sort of experience you're looking for, and then work through all that tough stuff of like math and like information and constraints on how people do things. And you can do that on board games and card games and physical games. So we'll kind of explore a range of those in the class. And then I think lastly, the other thing I would say about all of this is that, like, I know, whenever I teach a lot of people who aren't really going to become necessarily game designers, right? I don't know how many people here are like, I want to go into games and do game design, or I just work in interaction design, or I do some media stuff. Games are a really interesting way to think about a lot of different things. Like there's a lot of they really inform a lot of interaction design. Because you really are getting in there and getting in people's heads and like messing with what they can and can't do. You're crafting little experiences for them. So I think what more and more a lot of what we do at Game Mechanic is games, but then some of them shade off into sort of just experiences and interactive toys and those sorts of things. I think thinking about game design in a sort of rigorous way and kind of exploring it is a good way to also build up your sort of tool set for doing those things as well. So I think that's hopefully in the class, those are the sorts of things that you can get out of exploring game design further, like we started to do today. So that's sort of my spiel. I think we're about. Thank you guys all so much for sticking around so long. I'll be around for a while for any questions you want to talk. Thank you guys.
I just have one question.